Thank you very much. So, thank you. Well, every year we gather here and we talk about the difficulties that face Israel, and this year is no different. I hate to use the same line I used last year, because the last year when I spoke to you, I said today Israel faces more threats, combined threats, and more serious threats than it has in its entire history. Unfortunately, it's even more true today than it was a year ago. Those threats have only multiplied, and I don't obviously need to remind every single one of you of every one of these single threats, but to recap briefly, Iran remains committed to regional dominance, and as part of that, the destruction of the Jewish state. The difference is we've now begun to see even more exactly how they intend to carry it out, and that is through a combination of their own weapons program, the development of long-range missiles that could strike anywhere in the region. For the first time, probably in history, certainly, since 1979, we have seen an Iranian regular military attack directly against a U.S. installation. We have seen their continued use of proxy groups across the region, including groups that haven't historically been tied to them, but are opportunistic, and Iran has been willing to pay to conduct these attacks. There has been, in Iraq, for example, a lull in some of these Shia group attacks, but that will not be permanent. The reason why there's a lull is because these Shia groups in Iran are waiting to see if the political process in Iraq can force the United States out. But eventually, if that doesn't happen, there will be a resumption of these attacks. And it's a strategy they've developed where they can use other groups to use the weapons they give them, the intelligence they give them, the guidance and direction they give them to kill Americans, to kill Israelis, and then to deny that it was them. And just in the last year, we've seen it. And by the way, I got a point. Last year, everybody recalls there was these limpet mines that were attached to the side of these merchant ships. And if you recall, back in September, October of last year, there were people running around in the media and in this town basically saying, well, how do we know it was Iran? And I said, well, it wasn't Luxembourg. It wasn't the Belgians. Who would it have been? They're the only people in the region with the capability to do that. But there were legitimate concerns. Nobody talks about that anymore. But go back. Pull the transcripts of the interviews, read the articles. There were people questioning whether it was them. That's exactly what they count on. Let me tell you what else they count on. They count on political divisions in the United States over Iran. And the strike on General, I don't even call him a general, he was a terrorist, Soleimani. The strike on Soleimani, where people around here are going around criticizing it as an assassination. He was an enemy combatant, responsible for the death and the maiming of thousands of Americans and others. And then you have this silliness in the press. Well, how do we know that he was going to conduct an imminent attack? Well, the reason, he wasn't there to open up a chain of hotels. Okay, he's not a stockbroker. There's only one reason why he travels. His number one job all day long was to attack and kill Americans and Israelis and drive us out of the region and wipe Israel out. That was his job. And so, again, a lot of well, how do we know and why we shouldn't have done it? It's made things worse. The bottom line is that Iran remains a threat to the world, to the United States, and of course directly to Israel. We pivot to Lebanon, which is in a total catastrophic mess politically, where Hezbollah has not just gained political power, but they have gained military power. Despite the fact that not once but twice I've sponsored, we've passed, and presidents have signed sanctions against Hezbollah 1 and 2, the Iranian assistance has provided them munitions, weapons they didn't used to have with greater lethality, and ultimately the ability to overwhelm any defense system in the world by just volume at some point. That threat exists. Of course, there's the other threats of radical Sunni Islamists who also hate Israel, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's ISIS or the associated groups that continue to run wild in parts of the region, including in neighboring Syria. The threats have multiplied. Then add to all of those threats ridiculous things like an international criminal court that does everything except go after criminals. And instead, it focuses on Israel, as so does the fraudulent human rights group that the UN has, which has distinguished members on it like Venezuela and Cuba and other things of that nature. Exactly. That's like, putting Charles Manson in charge of the anti-murder portfolio, for a government. But that's what that's what Israel also deals with on the international level, is an effort to delegitimize its right to exist. And it comes to a head in this insidious BDS movement, which in my view, and I say this without any reservation, is nothing but anti-Semitism disguised as foreign policy and economic policy. But that's what it is. And so, we had an effort last year to basically say if a state decides you want to be a part of BDS as a business, you have a right to do that, but we're not going to do business with you. The state of Florida, we're not going to do contracts with you. And it met opposition. We couldn't get it passed. People that were used to be for it were against it. And they make up all kinds of stupid arguments about the First Amendment. And the First Amendment doesn't apply to businesses, number one. Number two, this doesn't say you can't be a part of it. I don't agree with the movement. I think it's insidious and evil, but you can sign up for it. But you have no constitutional right. No business has a constitutional right to have contracts with a city, a county, a state, or the federal government. And all it says is that if the elected leaders of a state decide that we don't want to do business with companies that do this stuff, you don't have to. And there was opposition to it, frankly, unfortunately, including people who used to be for it. So I hope we can revisit that. The one I'm really focused on now is a bipartisan bill with Senator Coons, the U.S.-Israel Security Assistance Act. And I won't bore you with all the details. Suffice it to say that it puts in statute, it formalizes what we have already agreed to do for Israel. And why is this important? It's more than just symbolic. One of the things that Israel's enemies will take into account when deciding whether or not to launch an attack against Israel is how strong the U.S. commitment to Israel is. Not whether we're going to send troops over there to fight on their behalf. Israel hasn't asked for that, never has asked for that, and will not ask for that. The question is, what happens if you do get, God forbid, into an open conflict with Iran or with Hezbollah or both, and you start running low on munitions and supplies? Can the United States be counted on to resupply Israel so that they can continue to fight? And this bill answers it in statute unequivocally that yes, so that this or any future administration will be bound to doing that. I tell people it's not a war bill, it's an anti-war bill. It prevents war. The best way to prevent a war is to convince the other side that they'll lose one. And this is why this sort of thing is so important. So I know you have some questions. Let me just wrap up with a very personal story. About 2 weeks ago, I had an opportunity with 4 other senators to travel to various countries, and one of them was Poland. And for the first time ever, had an opportunity to visit Auschwitz I and II. And no matter how many movies you watch, books you read, and stories you hear, there's nothing like seeing with your own eyes the industrialization of murder at a scale that the world has never seen before or since. And unfortunately, we as a society are not good at history. By that I mean that we are a young country. And sometimes when you travel abroad, you recognize that there are nations in the world who are shaped by hundreds, if not thousands of years of history. In America, because we're such a young and vibrant nation, history is what happened 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And it's unfortunate in that regard. And it is troubling that in many parts of our society and country and other parts of the world, full recognition of how horrific, how massive what happened in the Holocaust has continued to decline, especially among younger people. But during that visit, someone who was in the group, not one of the senators, asked a question, and that is, well, if they knew that this was coming, people knew what was happening at this point, right? I mean, if you're a Jew in Czechoslovakia and Poland, any of these countries, you knew that Adolf Hitler was an anti-Semite. Why wouldn't you just leave? Why wouldn't you leave? And a lot of people tried to. The answer to that question was, there was nowhere to go. There were more than enough countries around the world that were willing to close the doors on you, including this one. And the fact of the matter is that many could not leave because there was nowhere for them to leave to. And it reminds us of why the state of Israel was even created in the first place. The only nation on earth created by the international community in the aftermath of the Second World War and in response to this horrific event known as the Holocaust, so that never again in the future would there not be a place where Jews could go if they face something similar. And that's a powerful reminder of why the U.S. has to remain so strongly committed no matter what the rest of the world has decided to do. Because in the end, that is what gave birth to this nation. That's what gave birth to the Jewish state. And that's what we should remain committed to. So that we will never, in our lifetime, or in our children's lifetime, or their children's lifetime, will ever again live in a world where if the ugly head of anti-Semitism raises itself to that degree. Anti-Semitism, as you've seen, is growing. It's been expressed in all kinds of different ways, and God forbid something like this should ever occur. But sadly, history has a way of repeating itself. And one of the commitments behind our support to the State of Israel is the recognition that never again will there not be a place where Jews can call home, where Jews can go to from anywhere on this planet if they face something like that. And so when we commit to our relationship with Israel, when we commit to Israel's not just right to exist, but right to defend itself, we do so because we are furthering that commitment. And we recognize that even today in this 21st century, even after 7 decades after that horrific event, there are still those in the world who seek to destroy that nation, including many of its neighboring countries and the and terrorist groups that operate within those countries. And so that brought it to full circle for me to stand there and recognize that if Israel existed in the 1930s and early 40s, some of those people might have been spared. There might have been a place for many of them to go. It would have still been a horrific event, and many still would have died. But many could have been saved. And that can never happen again. And so that's why our commitment to this is so firm and strong, beyond the fact that Israel is the only free enterprise pro-American democracy in the Middle East. And if there were more pro-American free enterprise democracies in the Middle East, I would venture to guess the world would be a safer and better place. And our foreign policy would cost a lot less money. But so far there's only one. And I, for one, and I believe my colleagues, frankly, for the most part across the political spectrum, remain firmly committed to ensuring that at least one pro-American free enterprise democracy continues to be able to prosper and be safe, and that's the State of Israel. So thank you for the chance to talk to you again.